A woman stands in the late afternoon light, her gown shimmering like fresh snow. A crown of silver rests upon her head, catching the last golden rays of the sun. Gladys Ricart smiles, unaware that this is the final photograph she will ever take. Beyond the lens, a white Rolls-Royce waits at the curb, its engine humming, ready to carry her to the next chapter of her life. Bridesmaids in soft green and champagne dresses stand around her, adjusting fabric, offering words of encouragement. It is a moment of pure joy, a moment of promise. But in the distance, a figure approaches. Dressed in dark fabric, he moves with purpose. A briefcase clutched in his hand, heavy with more than just its contents. The world around him continues, oblivious. Guests chatter, a child giggles. The door to the house remains open, welcoming. Then, silence. A sharp sound pierces the still air. Not laughter, not music, the crack of a revolver. In an instant, the perfect day shatters. What could drive a man to such an unspeakable act? What darkness festers within the human mind, turning love into obsession, obsession into violence? Stay with me as we uncover the chilling story of Gladys Ricart. Gladys Ricart was a woman who believed in love. Born into a hardworking Dominican family, she carried the values of resilience and warmth, traits that shone through in every aspect of her life. She was known for her kindness, for the way she welcomed people into her home, for the way she laughed, a full, unrestrained sound that had once filled the rooms she would soon never step into again. She had spent years building a future for herself, raising her son, Davis, and ensuring that her family had everything they needed. To those who knew her, she was more than just a friend, a mother, or a sister. She was a pillar of strength. In her, people saw determination, a woman who had overcome hardship, who had found a way to make life work despite its challenges. And for many years, she had been in love. Augustin Garcia had been a constant presence in her life. At first, he was charming, attentive, the kind of man who seemed to know exactly what to say, what to do, to make someone feel special. He was older, experienced, a man of means. To the outside world, their relationship seemed steady, the natural course of two people who had spent years together. But time reveals the true nature of a man. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the warmth he once showed had turned rigid. Conversations became less about understanding and more about control. The little freedoms that had once belonged to Gladys were stripped away, first subtly, then all at once. Where she went, who she spoke to, what she wore, everything was under his watchful eye. Psychologists have long studied the behaviors of men who struggle with control. Dr. Elaine Murray, a forensic psychologist, describes it as a condition in which obsession masquerades as devotion. For individuals like Garcia, she explains, love is not about partnership. It is about possession. When that possession is threatened, their identity collapses. The person they claim to love becomes an object they refuse to relinquish. It was a relationship built on shifting ground. The arguments grew more frequent, the sense of suffocation undeniable. And then one day, Gladys made a choice that changed everything. She walked away. No longer willing to live under his rules, she ended the relationship. She wanted more for herself, for her son. She wanted happiness, a love that did not feel like a cage. For Garcia, this was unacceptable. In his mind, they were not over. Not truly. The world was simply going through an imbalance, a momentary distortion, and soon things would be right again. All it would take was time. And if time did not fix things, then action would. For 9 months, Garcia watched as the life he believed belonged to him drifted further and further from his grasp. But even as he tried to pretend that nothing had changed, the world around him continued. And then there was James Preston. A businessman from Brooklyn, James was everything Augustin was not. He was younger, grounded, a man who saw love as something shared, not owned. When he met Gladys, he saw her as she was, brilliant, caring, full of life. And she, in turn, saw in him a new beginning. Their relationship was fast but genuine. In months, he had given her the love she had spent years searching for. He asked her to marry him, and she said yes. For the first time in a long time, she was certain of something. She was going to be happy. But as she planned for a future, Garcia refused to let go of the past. He had tried everything. Calls that were never returned, messages that were never answered. He had driven past her house, hoping to catch a glimpse of the life she was building without him. The image of her happiness became unbearable. Then, in a final, desperate act, he left 100 roses on her lawn. 100 declarations of love. 100 reminders of a time he could not move past. 100 warnings. Gladys had seen them, but she did not respond. She knew there was nothing left to say. Her wedding was set. The venue, the guests, the dress, it was all in place. The morning of September 26 began like any other. The sky painted in soft hues of blue, the air thick with anticipation. It was a day that would be remembered, but not for the reasons it should have been. Inside the home on Elizabeth Street, the final touches were being made. Gladys Ricart stood before a mirror, the delicate lace of her gown draped over her shoulders. Her mother, Anna Rosario, adjusted the tiara resting on her daughter's head, ensuring it sat perfectly among the cascading curls of dark hair. Nearby, her son, Davis, moved between guests, excitement flickering across his face. The house was alive with movement, with laughter, with a chorus of voices carrying through the open doors and windows. Bridesmaids whispered final words of encouragement. The flower girls twirled in their dresses, marveling at the way the fabric caught the light. Outside, the neighborhood stood still, watching. On this quiet street in Ridgefield, a wedding was about to begin. Neighbors peered from porches, smiling as Gladys stepped outside for a final round of photographs. She waved, her expression glowing with a happiness that could be felt by anyone near. A woman on her way to happiness. Parked along the curb, a white Rolls-Royce waited, its polished surface reflecting the late afternoon sun. Behind it, two stretched limousines stood ready, lined up in elegant procession. Everything was set. Across town, Augustin Garcia moved with precision. He reached for the crisp white shirt laid out before him. His hands, steady, buttoned it slowly, methodically. The tie was next, looped carefully, tightened just enough to sit neatly against his collar. Then the suit, dark, pressed, indistinguishable from that of any other wedding guest. To the casual observer, it was nothing more than formal attire, the expected clothing of a man preparing to witness a moment of celebration. But this was no guest. This was no man coming to share in joy. This was a man who had come to stop the wedding. In the quiet of his home, he retrieved a briefcase, fastening the latches securely before lifting it in one hand. It was heavier than it should have been. Inside, nestled against the lining, sat a .38 caliber revolver. His car, a black SUV, was waiting. The drive was short. Familiar roads stretched before him, leading to a house he had visited countless times. The home where, for years, he had been welcomed. The home that no longer belonged to him. He arrived unnoticed. The street was filled with guests, with chatter, with the energy of a wedding just moments from unfolding. He parked, stepping out with the practiced ease of a man who belonged. He was not stopped. The door was open. Inside, the air was thick with celebration. The scent of fresh flowers filled the room. The sound of heels clicking against the tiled floor echoed through the hallway. Some guests turned, their eyes catching a glimpse of him as he entered. Faces registered recognition, but not concern. He walked forward. Gladys had returned inside, standing before a camera, shifting slightly to pose. The silver tiara reflected the light overhead, the shimmer of her gown cascading in soft folds around her. The photographer adjusted the lens. The guests continued their conversations, and Augustin Garcia opened the briefcase. The first shot shattered the air, splitting through the sound of laughter, of movement, of music. Then another, and another. For a moment, time did not move. A scream cut through the silence. Then another. Bodies jolted into motion. People ran, some instinctively toward the sound, others away from it. The floor, once pristine, was now stained. Gladys Ricart collapsed, her gown pooling around her as the silver tiara toppled from her head. Outside, the limousines remained idle. Engines still running, chauffeurs still waiting. But there would be no wedding. Augustin Garcia stood unmoving, the revolver heavy in his grip, his gaze fixed on the woman lying before him. His breaths came sharp and ragged, the weight of the act still settling into his frame. Across the room, another presence surged forward. Her brother. He reached him in seconds, the force of his body slamming against Garcia's, sending both men staggering against a table. The gun lifted once more, but before another shot could ring out, a pair of hands clamped down on Garcia's wrist. The struggle was fierce. The weapon, still warm, jerked between them. Garcia's grip tightened, his fingers straining against the trigger. But the revolver was empty. The fight did not stop. Glass shattered. A chair toppled. The sounds of the scuffle fused with the screams still echoing through the house. And then a shift. Garcia's balance faltered. The gun wrenched from his grasp. The weapon clattered to the floor. The weight of another man's strength pressed against him now, holding him down. His breaths came faster, but the moment had passed. The fury had spent itself. Across the room, Gladys lay motionless, the train of her gown pulled around her. No longer a garment of celebration, but a veil draped over a life cut short. Outside, the street had erupted. Neighbors had rushed from their homes, drawn by the sounds, by the shouts, by the unmistakable terror carried on the wind. Some stood frozen on their porches, their hands pressed against their mouths. Others moved toward the home, unsure of what they might find. And then she emerged. Ana Rosario. She staggered forward, her steps unsteady, her body swaying as if the world itself had tipped beneath her feet. She reached the middle of the street and collapsed. Her cries echoed across the pavement, her hands clawing at nothing, reaching for someone no longer there. The sound was unlike any other, deeper than sorrow, more consuming than grief. It was the voice of a mother whose child had just been taken from her. The echoes of gunfire had barely faded when the first sirens pierced the air. The street outside was lined with stunned onlookers, neighbors clutching at one another, guests trembling in disbelief. Some still stood frozen on the front steps, eyes fixed on the doorway, unwilling or unable to move. Inside, the scene was one of devastation. Gladys Ricart lay still, her gown fanned out across the floor, the silver tiara resting just inches away. The celebration that should have been had turned into something else entirely, a gathering of shock, of disbelief, of tragedy. And in the center of it all, Augustin Garcia stood motionless. The gun had been wrestled from his grip. His arms, once filled with fury, now hung limp at his sides. The fight had drained from him, the energy that had driven him here replaced by something empty, something unreadable. When the first officers arrived, the air was thick with the remnants of violence. They moved swiftly, weapons drawn, voices cutting through the confusion. Garcia did not resist. He offered no struggle, no desperate attempt to flee. He had come here with a purpose, and now that purpose was complete. The officers ordered him to the ground. His hands were wrenched behind his back, the cold steel of the handcuffs locking into place. The weight of a knee pressed between his shoulder blades as he was held down. He said nothing at first, not when they lifted him to his feet, not when they led him out onto the street, where dozens of horrified faces watched as he was escorted toward the waiting police car. But then, as he was placed inside, he spoke. "I had no choice," he muttered. The words were quiet, barely audible over the shouts and cries surrounding him. I had no choice. But the evidence told a story. He had arrived in formal attire, dressed as if he, too, were part of the wedding. The black SUV had carried him here with certainty, not hesitation. The briefcase, carefully packed, had concealed the weapon, a .38 caliber revolver, fully loaded, prepared for exactly what had transpired. And then there were the roses, 100 of them, left just days earlier, an offering that spoke of something unresolved, something desperate. Gladys Ricart had seen them. She had chosen not to respond. Had she been afraid? Those closest to her would later reveal the unspoken weight that had pressed against her in those final months. She had moved on, but she had never truly been free. There were whispers of Garcia's lingering presence, of phone calls that went unanswered, of a past that refused to let her go. Some would later wonder, had she known, in some part of herself, that this day might come? Or had she clung to hope, believing that love, once severed, could not still hold such a deadly grip? Miles away, at a church in Queens, James Preston waited. The guests had begun to arrive, filling the pews, adjusting their ties and gowns, whispering in anticipation. The floral arrangements had been carefully placed, the aisle adorned in soft white petals. The music was ready, the vows prepared. And at the altar, James stood, waiting. Each passing minute brought with it a quiet impatience, the simple assumption that somewhere across town, his bride was putting the final touches on her dress, making her way to him. But then something shifted. A murmur spread through the crowd, small at first, then growing, voices hushed but urgent. Some checked their phones, their expressions tightening, their hands clutching at the programs in their laps. James saw it, the shift in energy, the quiet gasps, the sudden unspoken knowing that something was wrong. A friend moved toward him, phone in hand, face pale. Then came the words. There would be no wedding today. James did not react at first. He blinked, the words hanging in the air, detached from reality. Then slowly, the meaning settled in. Gladys was gone. The bride who had woken that morning with joy in her heart, the woman he was meant to call his wife in just moments, had been stolen from him. She had not hesitated when he asked her to marry him. She had said yes without fear, without doubt. But she had never made it to the altar. James Preston would never hear her vows. He would never see her walk down the aisle, never hold her hands in his, never place the ring upon her finger. The church that had been filled with love was now consumed by grief. He had waited for a bride who would never arrive. As Augustin Garcia sat in the back of the police car, hands cuffed, eyes vacant, the world around him continued to move. The street remained lined with flashing lights, officers moving between stunned guests, reporters beginning to gather. Inside the house, Gladys Ricart's body remained where she had fallen. Her mother's cries still rang through the air, a sound no words could comfort. A wedding dress, once untouched, now bore the marks of a day that had begun with promise and ended in tragedy. A love story, rewritten in blood. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but they turn without pause. For Augustin Garcia, the journey from a home filled with celebration to the confines of a courtroom was swift and absolute. The evidence was irrefutable. The crime had been witnessed by dozens. The weapon recovered at the scene. There was no mystery to unravel, no search for a missing suspect. There was only the question of why and what punishment would follow. The trial began in a hushed courtroom, the air thick with expectation. Rows of observers sat in silence, their faces a mixture of grief and determination. Family members, friends, reporters, each had come seeking the same thing, justice. At the center of it all, Augustin Garcia. Dressed in a suit, his hands resting on the table before him, he was a far cry from the man who had stormed into a home and shattered lives. His expression remained neutral, his posture rigid, as if he were merely a bystander to the events that had brought him here. But he was no bystander. He was the reason Gladys Ricart was not in this room. He was the reason a wedding had turned into a funeral. The prosecution laid out the facts with precision. Gladys had ended their relationship. She had moved on, found love again, planned a future without him. Garcia had refused to accept it. He had planned this. The evidence was undeniable. He had dressed for the occasion, driven to her home, entered uninvited. He had carried a weapon. And when he saw her standing in that white gown, moments away from leaving for her wedding, he had done what no one could have imagined. One shot, then another, and another. A crime of rage, a crime of control. The jury listened in silence. The weight of what had happened pressed against them, undeniable, inescapable. And then it was Garcia's turn to speak. His defense team argued desperation. They spoke of heartbreak, of a man who had lost the woman he loved and acted in a moment of unthinkable sorrow. But sorrow does not plan. Sorrow does not dress itself in a suit, pack a weapon, and walk with certainty into a home where it is no longer welcome. Garcia himself remained composed, his voice steady as he addressed the court. "I loved her," he said. "I was lost without her." There was no apology, no plea for forgiveness, only the quiet insistence that what he had done was not truly his fault. He had been abandoned, he claimed. He had been humiliated. The words fell heavy in the courtroom, each one met with stony silence. Across the room, the family of Gladys Ricart sat unmoving. Her mother, her son, her fiancé. Faces that had known her laughter, that had planned for a future where she would stand beside them, not be spoken of in the past tense. And then the judge spoke. His voice carried no hesitation. This was not a crime of passion, he stated. This was an execution. The courtroom held its breath. You did not act in the heat of the moment. You did not snap under the weight of grief. You planned this. You carried this out with deliberation, and you have shown no remorse. The sentence was handed down. Life in prison. No possibility of parole. For Augustin Garcia, there would be no freedom. No second chance. The same certainty with which he had walked into that home was now the certainty with which he would spend the rest of his days behind bars. For the family of Gladys Ricart, it was justice. But it was not closure, because no sentence, no punishment could bring back the woman who should have been standing at the altar that day. And as the gavel fell, sealing his fate, there remained only one truth. Gladys Ricart would never come home. The echoes of that September afternoon did not fade with time. The memory of what happened inside 825 Elizabeth Street remained imprinted in the hearts of those who loved Gladys Ricart, a woman who had woken up that morning believing in the future, a mother, a daughter, a fiancée, moments away from stepping into the next chapter of her life. Her story had been rewritten in an instant. A moment that should have been filled with vows and celebration became something else entirely. A love story cut short, a wedding dress never worn beyond its final fitting, a groom left standing at an altar that would never welcome his bride. And so the question remains, could this have been prevented? There are no simple answers. Obsession does not begin with violence. It begins quietly, subtly, disguised as love, masked as devotion. Augustin Garcia had not raised his voice in the early days. He had not shown anger at first. He had held Gladys close, had told her he loved her, had made her believe in the future they might have together. But control is not always loud. It is found in the small things, the unnoticed moments, when a partner questions your whereabouts too often, when they discourage friendships, when their affection is conditional, when love becomes something that must be earned rather than freely given. Garcia had not let go easily. His presence had lingered long after the relationship had ended. The phone calls, the messages, the unexpected appearances, each a reminder that, in his mind, the choice had never been hers to make. Then, the roses. 100 of them. A symbol that should have meant love, twisted into something else entirely. There is a pattern in these cases. These warning signs are often dismissed. It is easy to believe that obsession will fade with time, that a person who cannot accept the end of a relationship will eventually move on. But that is not always the case. In the United States alone, nearly 1 in 3 women experience stalking or threats from a former partner. Many do not report it. Some do not realize the danger until it is too late. And when violence does occur, it is not spontaneous. It is the final act of a pattern that had been present all along. Could more have been done to keep Gladys Ricart safe? This is the question that lingers long after the trial has ended, long after Garcia has been locked away, long after the flowers from her wedding day have wilted. Some believe the system failed her, that a restraining order, had it been pursued, might have made a difference, that more awareness, more urgency could have prevented what happened. But restraining orders do not stop bullets, and far too often they do not stop the men who believe they have lost control. In cases like this, intervention must come sooner, before the calls, before the roses, before the moment when it is too late. James Preston had planned for a wedding. He had imagined a future, a home, a life, years of moments yet to come. And in the space of a few seconds, all of it had been taken from him. He had not been there when it happened. He had not heard the gunshots. He had not seen the woman he loved take her last breath. But he had felt the loss just the same. Stories like Gladys Ricart's should not be repeated. But they are. Every day across the world, people live in fear of those who claim to love them. They feel trapped, uncertain, afraid to seek help. They are told that it will pass, that the calls will stop, that the roses are just a gesture, that things will get better. But not all obsessions fade. And no one should have to live in fear of the person they once trusted. If you or someone you know is in danger, do not wait. Do not hesitate. There is help. There are people who will listen. There are ways to break free. Because no one should ever have to die in a wedding dress. What do you think? Should Augustin Garcia have received the death penalty? Or does the weight of his crime demand something more? Comments and let us know your thoughts. If you found this story compelling and believe more people need to hear cases like Gladys Ricart's, consider subscribing to the channel. We bring you true crime stories that deserve to be told, stories of love, loss, and the pursuit of justice. By subscribing, you ensure that these voices are never forgotten, that these lessons are never lost. So, if you want more in-depth true crime documentaries, hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join us as we uncover the stories that need to be heard. Because awareness can save lives, and no one should ever have to suffer in silence.